All right, so we are doing the part 2. We are doing part 2 of the revision series. In the previous edition part, we solved syllogism and conditional questions and some crossover questions, which had both syllogism type statements, all, some not, and also conditional statements, right? So we'll take it forward, and in today's session, what we'll do is we'll cover assumptions, which is very frequently asked in AILET. We'll cover strong and weak arguments, again, a very frequently asked topic. And we'll also cover some miscellaneous questions that have been asked in the AILETs in the past years. Now, what I've done is in all these topics, I've included mostly AILET questions, previous year questions. Okay. So we'll do some theory, very little theory, and we'll follow it up with solving these previous year questions. Okay. So let's start with assumptions. Okay, so before we can go on to the questions, let's do a very quick recap of what assumptions are and how do we do these questions. Okay, so assumptions are something necessary for the argument to hold, without which the argument will make little sense to no sense. If I deny that particular statement in the options, right? If I deny that statement, the correct option, the argument will fall apart, right? So assumptions are that critical for the argument to hold. Usually, these questions test us on implicit assumptions. These are not stated in the argument, right? So the correct options that you will see in the option list, they will have some new information not already stated in the argument. So the author has taken something for granted and did not feel the need to state it, right? But it is something that is very critical for the argument to hold. Okay. So these assumptions can appear in two forms. One, something that links the premise to the conclusion, right? Fixes a certain logical gap in the argument. So the premise statement is on something, talking about something. The conclusion is about something slightly, or it has some new information. The conclusion contains some information that has not already been covered in the premise statements, right? So we have to figure an option that connects these pieces of information, the one in the premise to the one in the conclusion, right? So the correct option will connect the premise to the conclusion, right? So that is one way in which these correct options may appear. The other way the correct option may appear is, this correct option does not really look like a linking sort of assumption. It does not look like linking the premise to some new piece of information in the conclusion. But still, this option becomes the correct option because it protects the argument from a certain attack. So there is something that may attack the argument, and this assumption, this correct option, denies it, right? So it protects the argument from a certain attack. So crucial that it becomes the assumption, right? So these are the two ways in which the correct option may appear. But all in all, we are looking for an option that is absolutely necessary for the argument to hold good, right? So let's see them. Let's solve a couple of questions to understand uh, what I mean by that. One second. Let's do this question. It had appeared in AILET 2016, right? So in this question, I'll tell you beforehand, the correct option is a linking assumption, the one that links the premise to the conclusion, right? Now you can take some time. I have done this in classes, so some of you might do it very quickly. But yes, just try solving this one. Okay, so let's do it together now. It says traditionally decision making by managers that is reasoned step by step has been considered preferably to intuitive decision making, right? Step by step, reasoned step by step has been considered preferable to intuitive decision making. However, a recent study found that top managers use intuition significantly more than did most middle or lower level managers. So the core argument starts from this, however. So I'll just underline just the part that is relevant for us to answer the question. So this part, right, it starts here. It says a recent study found that top managers used intuition more. So top managers used intuition more than did most middle or lower level managers, right? Now, from this fact, the conclusion drawn is intuition is actually more effective than careful methodical reasoning. Since top managers use intuition more, intuition is actually more effective than careful methodical reasoning, right? So, what new piece of information I was talking about, it comes something like this. So if you look at this part, it is more effective. It says intuition is more effective than methodical reasoning. How has the author concluded this? Because no such thing appears in the premise statement. In the premise statement, what we are given is that top managers use intuition more, right? But to from that fact, the conclusion is drawn, it is more effective, right? So it becomes some new piece of information in the conclusion. So what the correct option will do is to connect these two pieces, right? The premise to the conclusion, right? Let's look at the options. A says methodical step-by-step reasoning is inappropriate for making many real-life management decisions. So the author's point is that intuition is more effective than methodical reasoning based on the fact that top managers, once again, I'll write it here. Right. So, based on the fact that top managers use intuition more than middle managers use intuition, the conclusion drawn is intuition is better than methodical reasoning, right? Now, do we require this? Because what we are checking is what is required for the argument to hold good. So, if I say methodical step by step reasoning is actually appropriate, I'm denying that statement, right? Is appropriate for making many real life decisions. Does it weaken the argument? No, the argument is simple that intuition is better than methodical. Even if methodical reasoning is appropriate for making many real life management decisions, intuition is better. So it does not harm the argument. If I negate this, it does not harm the argument, right? So A is not required for the argument to hold. B says top managers have the ability to use either intuitive or methodical step by step reasoning in making decisions. Now, many students fall for this option. This looks like an attractive one that top managers have the ability to use either intuitive or methodical reasoning. Let's say, let's deny this, right? We say they do not have the ability, right? And all they can do is use only intuition. They don't know how to use methodical. Does it weaken the argument? No. Look, the statement given to us was top managers use intuition significantly more than did most middle or lower level managers. The claim was never that top managers can use intuition and methodical both, right? So, B, if I deny it, it does not really harm the argument. So, B is also not necessary, right? Okay, so while you are solving such a question in the exam, right, you might just want to hold on to B, right, because you're not immediately able to eliminate it, and that's okay, right? C says the decisions made by middle and lower level managers can be made as easily by using methodical as by using intuitive. So this is irrelevant, right? What is easy and what is not sort of does not concern the argument. C is out. Top managers are more effective at decision making than middle or lower level managers. Now, does that connect the premise to the conclusion? Remember, premise was talking about top managers using intuition significantly more than middle managers. The conclusion was about that intuition is better, more effective than methodical. So something has to connect the ability of top managers to use intuition and then intuition being more effective. We need a statement connecting these two pieces of information. So option D does that, right? Top managers are more effective. Now the conclusion makes much more sense. Top managers use intuition more than middle managers, and top managers are more effective at decision making, and therefore intuition is more effective than methodical reasoning, right? So D fills in that gap in the argument, and D is necessary for the argument to hold. So D is correct here, right? So this is one example of how the linking assumption might appear, right? We can look at another example. This one is not from AILET, but from Clat, but that's all right. So let's see. Let's do this one. So again, what you can do is you can take some time to solve it on your own, and then we can discuss it. All right, so let's do it together, everyone. So it says, in order to be eligible for election to the Lok Sabha, a person must be at least 25 years of age and one must not be bankrupt. Okay, so this is the premise part, right? This is the premise. Therefore, Jatinder Singh, over 50 years of age and without any criminal convictions, cannot be the Speaker of the Lok Sabha since he has just filed for bankruptcy, right? So, in the conclusion, right, we have two sort of pieces of information that are new. One is this part, which is without any criminal convictions, and the other and the more important part is Speaker of the Lok Sabha, because the conclusion is about this, right? So, in the premise, the author was talking about eligibility for election to the Lok Sabha. In the conclusion, the conclusion is drawn on the eligibility of the Speaker of the Lok Sabha, right? So, eligibility for election and eligibility to become the Speaker. We need an assumption, because it is an assumption question. We need a statement that connects the premise to the conclusion, something that is necessary for the argument to hold. Now, uh, a quick scan of the options will tell you that D has to be out, right? And then maybe people get confused uh, on A and B, and C, right? But let's discuss, right? So what I'll do is I'll break this down, okay? So what was given to us in the premise was uh, in order to be eligible for election, so I'll just write eligible for election, right? EE. One must be at least 25, minimum 25, and not bankrupt. Okay, minimum 25 and not bankrupt. Now, the conclusion talks about uh, Jatinder Singh cannot be the speaker, right? Because he has filed for bankruptcy. Bankruptcy cannot be the speaker. Speaker is S. Okay. Now, if I can bring this bankruptcy wala part in the premise, so this is the conclusion, right? This is the conclusion. So in the premise, if I can take the contrapositive, right? Because this is a conditional set of statements, and we covered conditional when we were doing in the previous sort of edition. तो कंडीशनल में व्हेन वी टेक द कॉन्ट्रा पॉजिटिव तो ऐसा कुछ हो जाएगा बी और नॉट 25 not eligible for election, right? If somebody is bankrupt or not 25, they won't be eligible for the sort of election to the Lok Sabha. Why? Because to be able to be eligible, they must be minimum 25 and not bankrupt. तो अगर bankrupt होंगे या 25 से कम है, they won't be eligible, right? So do you see a certain gap here? Premise tha, right? So this is the revised premise, the contrapositive. Bankruptcy or not 25, not eligible. Bankruptcy, not speaker. So obviously there is a connect between not eligible and not speaker, something like this. Somebody who's not eligible, somebody who's not eligible cannot be the speaker, right? This is the missing link. Or if I take the contrapositive again, speaker eligible for election. ठीक है, reverse and negate वाला. तो speaker eligible. So in order to become the speaker, they must be eligible, right? This is the missing link. Now look at C. Only those eligible for election are eligible to be the speaker of the Lok Sabha. This fixes that logical gap, right? Everyone. And if you look at A and B, right? A says anyone over 50 years of age is eligible to be the Speaker of the Lok Sabha as long as he has no criminal conviction. It just misses the point because it does not talk about bankruptcy at all. ये तो बोल रहा है if you are over 50 years of age and you have no criminal convictions, you are eligible to be the speaker. That is contradicted in the passage because bankruptcy वाला भी factor है, right? So A is out. B says people without criminal convictions cannot be elected to the Lok Sabha even if they are not bankrupt. Again, this is this is rather a irrelevant again option. Option C is correct. It fixes the gap. It tells us what is missing in the argument, what is unstated in the argument, that in order to become the speaker, you must be eligible for election. Only then the argument will hold true, right? Without this, the argument will fall apart. Option C is correct. All right. Okay, so in the two questions that we just saw, right, in both these questions, the correct option was linking the premise to the conclusion, right? Now let's look at a question wherein we said that the assumption may appear in the form of something that protects the argument from an attack that could render the argument invalid, right? So such options will also be correct. So let's do this question from AILET 2019. All right, so let's do this together. Proposed new safety rules for seashore city port would lengthen considerably the minimum time between departures from the port. Okay. In consequence, the port would be able to accommodate 10% fewer vessels than currently use the daily port daily. The city's operating budget depends heavily on taxes generated by tourist spending, and most of the tourists come by ships. Therefore, the proposed new safety rules, if adopted, will reduce the revenue available for the operating budget. Right. So, what's given to us can be broken down as that because of these new safety rules, right? I'll just write it down here. New safety rules, right? The time between departures will increase, and number of ships, vessels would be ships, right? Number of ships coming at the port at a point in time would be reduced, and that will lead to a reduction in the number of tourists, and that will result in a reduction of tourist spending, and therefore the operating budget will come down, right? Such a link is given to us. Okay, new safety rules will ultimately eventually result in decline of operating budget, right? And the author has shown this through this chain of events that will happen. Now, the argument depends on assuming which of the following. Option A, the response to the adoption of new safety rules would not include an increase in the number of passengers per ship. Okay, that immediately looks like an interesting option, right? The response to the adoption of new safety rules would not include an increase in the number of ships. Remember, the author said because of these new safety rules, number of ships will come down. What if it doesn't happen? What if new safety rules, immediately after new safety rules, we have sort of increase in the number of passenger per ship is what is given and not in the number of ships. So for example, the introduction of new safety rules, the ships number of ships remain reduced, but what if number of tourists remains the same or it increases? Can I then be able to conclude this, that operating budget will come down? No. So what if with the introduction of new safety rules, there is actually an increase in the number of passengers per ship? So initially, let's say there were 10 ships coming to the port and it had 10 tourists each, so 100. Now it has come down to, let's say, 8, and number of tourists per ship now has increased to 15, right? So what happens? So there's actually an increase in the number of tourists, right? Then the argument falls apart. So, in order for the argument to hold good, it is necessary that it does not include an increase in the number of passengers per ship, right? So this becomes that protecting assumption, right? It protects the argument from an attack, because if I remove this, if I deny this, and if I say that it will include an increase in the number of passengers per ship, the argument will be exposed, the argument gets attacked. Such will not be the case, will protect the argument, right? So this is required. What is given to us in option A is required for the argument to hold good. So option A is the correct option here. But let me quickly discuss a couple of more options which become potential traps. One of them is option D. Increasing the minimum time between departures is the only way to achieve necessary safety improvements. So, what's the conclusion? The conclusion is the proposed new safety rules, if adopted, will reduce the revenue available. Just look at this part. If adopted, if the new safety rules are adopted, then it will reduce the revenue available for the operating budget. If it is not adopted, then it won't. Is it the only way to go about things? That is not being commented on. That's not the author's point. Maybe there are some other ways to achieve the required sort of whatever they want to achieve, but that is not discussed in the passage. All the passage is concerned with, if you adopt this particular set of rules, the revenue will come down, right? So option D is irrelevant, so D is out. And the other option that comes close is option C. If the proposed safety rules are adopted, the reduction in tourist numbers will not result mainly from a reduction in the number of tourists who spend relatively little in seashore city, right? So this looks like an option that protects the argument, especially with this word will not, this phrase, but actually it is not. It is irrelevant. Let me show you. So it says the reduction in tourist numbers will not result mainly from a reduction in the number of tourists who spend relatively little. Let's say this reduction actually comes about from a reduction in the number of tourists who spend relatively little. Let's say they spend only rupee 1. Okay. They spend only rupee 1. यही वाले टूरिस्ट कम हुए हैं. Will there be a reduction in revenue? Let's say 10 such people, there's a reduction, the number is 10, right? That number, they reduced by number 10. So what is the loss in revenue? Let's say 10 rupees. Is it still a loss in revenue? Yes, of course. So the author's point is that it will reduce the revenue available. Significantly or not, that's not the case. That's not what the point is. The point is revenue will come down, even if it is by a small amount, right? So this option again becomes irrelevant. That from where this reduction will happen, from people who spend little or from people who spend more, it does not really matter. The revenue will still be lost, right? So C is incorrect. Option A is correct here. Okay, everyone. Again, A protects the argument. It is necessary for the argument to hold. Okay. Let's do some more. So I wanted to start with these questions. They were slightly difficult also compared to the others that we'll do in the presentation, but I wanted to start with them so as to tell you as to how these assumptions can appear. One, linking the premise to the conclusion, and two, something that protects the argument. Okay, let's do this one now. So all the questions, mostly all the questions that we'll do from here on will be AILET previous year questions. Okay. The ones which are not, I'll tell you beforehand, but I don't think I've included any other questions apart from AILET previous year in this particular presentation. Okay, so let's solve this one. I'll just write, I think this is AILET 2022. Okay, let's do this now. Car makers are taking the middle path in their electrification journey in India, with powerful hybrids flagging off the green race for three leading Japanese manufacturers. Japanese car makers believe introducing hybrids will eventually lead to higher localization of parts for electric vehicles, making them more accessible to larger customer base. These manufacturers have no plans of launching an electric car in India before 2025 and are currently working on localization. So why are they working on localization of hybrid vehicles? Because they believe that the belief is that it will eventually lead to higher localization of parts for electric vehicles, making them more accessible to a larger customer base. So eventually they'll make that complete transition to electrical, but currently they are working on the hybrids, right? So which option do you think? The passage assumes which one of the following? Whatever they are doing, right? These car makers are doing. What are they assuming? A says car makers in Japan have been successful in scaling up production of electric vehicles in the past. So whether they have been able to do this in the past in some other geography or not, that is that is irrelevant to the argument, right? We need something that is required for the argument to hold. That before they make that complete transition into electric, they would sort of first introduce the hybrid ones and then they'll move on to electric, because that way they will sort of achieve higher localization of parts for electric vehicles, right? B says Indian customers are unable to afford electric vehicles. Okay, that may seem to be true because they are aiming localization of parts for electric vehicles, but then it's not required for the argument to hold. What is the belief? The belief is we'll introduce hybrids, achieve localization of parts for electric vehicles, and thereafter introduce completely electric vehicles, right? So this is irrelevant. C says manufacturing processes of for electric and hybrid vehicles are similar to the extent that production of latter, which is hybrid, shall ease future production of the former. Right. And that's why this is the assumption with which they are operating, right? We'll start off with hybrids, achieve localization, and then move on to electric, right? So the assumption is this. D, there will be no electric car production in India until 2025. The Japanese car makers won't do it. Some other car makers might just be doing it, right? So again, this is not required. So look how when we are solving these assumption questions, we are focusing on that word required. What is required for the argument to hold, right? So option C here is correct. Okay, just keep letting me know the answers. Those who are watching it live, just keep replying in the live chat. Okay, this one again is an AILET question. Okay, I don't remember the year, but it's AILET after 2020. Okay, so most of the questions will be questions from AILETs after 2020, right? So this is again an AILET previous year PYQ. All right, let's do it together. So it says AI often elicits a sense of amazement, of wonder, of possibility for the future. But just as AI offers advancements, there's also the potential for a bleak future. Machines are prone to bias and racism. These machines learn by running training data through algorithms each crafted by human handlers. Okay. Therefore, if the data inputted into the system is biased, the result will be biased too. This is dangerous and the threat needs to be addressed before biased AI systems become ubiquitous. Ultimately, AI systems have the potential to deepen existing systemic inequalities, particularly in industries like healthcare, employment, and criminal justice. Right? So we understand that argument. Now, which one of the following is an assumption required by the argument? A says existing data sets can incorporate the biases of human handlers, which reflects in AI output. And that seems to be the correct option, right? Immediately, existing sets can incorporate the biases of human handlers. If I say cannot, then the whole argument collapses, right? So option A is absolutely necessary for the argument to hold. So let's look at the other options also. Large scale deployment of AI systems has been hindered by the likelihood. I think for some reason, whatever I'm writing on the screen is not visible. Let me just very quickly reshare this. Once again. I'll use the red pen for better visibility. Okay. Uh, so we were saying option A is necessary because if I deny this, I say existing data sets cannot incorporate the biases of human handlers, which reflects in AI output, then that entire argument collapses, right? So this is the basic requirement for the argument to hold. B says large scale deployment of AI systems has been hindered by the likelihood of biased results. Okay, no such point is made in the passage, so therefore this statement is not required for the argument. Human handlers have tried to manipulate AI systems through the use of biased data. Now, C may look tempting, right? That human handlers have tried to manipulate AI systems, but that's not the point, right? So the author is very likely, implying that these biases are inherent to us, right? So the biases of human handlers, they sort of manifest themselves as AI outputs, right? Outputs from these AI systems, but it's not being said that they are being intentionally, right? The presence of intention is not stated in the argument that this is being done intentionally, right? That human handlers are doing it, purposefully. That is not being said, right? So the chances are high that the author is referring to the inherent biases of humans, right? So C is out. Industries like healthcare, employment, and criminal justice are in urgent need of AI systems. Again, no such point is made, right? So D is out. Option A is required, option A is correct. All right. Okay, let's do this one. Another AILET PYQ. So keep letting me know any doubts, your answers in the live chat. Okay. Even though switching to veganism may be costly and sometimes inconvenient, it is a good change if one wishes to improve their chances of leading a healthy life while benefiting the environment. Okay, so it may be costly and sometimes inconvenient, right? Which one of the following is an assumption necessarily taken for granted, right? All these phrases tell us that it is an assumption question, right? Even if there is no assumption mentioned. In the above statement, the costs involved and inconvenience of making a change act as deterrents for most people. Okay, I think the option would have been good, but for this part, most. Okay. B says it is possible to undertake practices that may impact how healthy a life one lives. Now, that is a very, very basic assumption required for this argument, right? Again, if I say it is not possible to undertake practices that may impact how healthy a life one lives, then that entire point on veganism is lost, right? It just falls apart. So B is that very basic requirement for the argument to hold, right? Better than A, right? As I said, that most word sort of undid option A. Non-vegetarianism impacts the environment most adversely. Again, we don't require this. Costly and inconvenient choices must always be made to effect positive changes. Again, not required, right? So some of these statements that seem exaggerated or extreme, right? They raise a red flag because in many of these arguments, such extreme statements won't be required, right? I'm not saying that outrightly reject these sort of extreme looking statements. But yes, they should definitely raise a red flag, right? But do consider them. If the argument itself is an extreme one, then an extreme statement would be an assumption, right? But yes, in this case, both C and D are incorrect. Option B is correct. Okay. So these were some of the assumption questions that we did. Okay. And we'll move on to, as in we are still on assumptions, we're still doing assumptions. As I said, this is a very frequently asked topic, and also can become a big scoring area for those who are able to solve these questions quite efficiently. But the other way these assumption questions are asked is in form of statement assumptions, right? So these are not fleshed out arguments as we saw a little while earlier, right? The premise separate and conclusion, and we are trying to fix a gap, or we are looking for a statement that protects the argument. These are just single statements in most occasions, right? Just a claim, one statement, and then followed up with one or two or three or four assumption statements, and then we have to figure which one of them is correct, right? So, firstly, don't confuse them with statement conclusion. Don't treat them as statement conclusion. Also, don't sort of try to really differentiate the two. Don't fall in that trap कि statement conclusion ये conclusion है कि assumption है, right? Don't do that, right? It's not required. uh, when you are solving for statement assumption, just stick to the rules of statement assumption. When you are solving statement conclusion, just stick to statement conclusion. What are these rules? Statement assumption में तो वही है, something we discussed earlier. We are looking for an assumption statement that is necessary for the claim, right? Something that is necessary for the claim. A statement is given to me, and then I'm looking at these two assumption statements, and I'm figuring for this claim to hold, whatever is being said in this particular statement, what is necessary? What might have to be believed to be true for this statement to make sense? Right? Again, what you can do is, while you are doing these statement assumption questions, is you can negate the assumption statement, and if on negation the claim made in the statement does not make sense, right? Then this assumption statement is the correct option, right? So I'm denying the assumption to check whether it is required for the statement given, right? And then it says sometimes what happens is the statement describes a certain action, right? Something like Saroj has applied for a loan at XYZ bank by mortgaging her house, right? So now when the assumptions would be given, you have to think in the shoes, you have to be, you have to be in the shoes of Saroj. With what assumption did you take that action, right? So a correct assumption statement would look something like the bank may consider granting loan to Saroj. Right? So again, you are not checking whether this is the conclusion or not, right? What you are checking is when that action was undertaken by Saroj, writing down that application to the bank. What did she assume? So she must definitely have assumed that bank may consider granting a loan. If I say, if I deny this, तो may का जब deny करते हैं तो will not होता है. तो remember this, okay? When I am denying may, it will become will not. And when I am denying will, it becomes may not. ठीक है? Logical opposites. So the bank will not consider granting a loan to Saroj. Then that action makes no sense. Then that action of writing an application to the bank does not make sense, right? So, of course, the statement that the bank may consider granting a loan to Saroj becomes an assumption. So just focus on that statement, and we'll solve some questions together. Just focus on the statement and check which of the assumption statements are necessary to be able to make that claim, or to be able to, or for that action to make sense, right? Don't think about conclusions when you're doing assumption questions. Statement conclusion mein kya hai? Statement conclusion mein you are working, sort of doing them as if you're doing inference. What follows? What sort of is necessarily true from the statement given, right? तो वो follows वाला part है, और उसको हम जब statement conclusion कर रहे हैं, then we are not bringing in the concept of statement assumption at all, because it might just confuse you. Okay, so let's solve for some statement assumption questions together. For example, let's do this one. Again, this is an AILET PYQ. All questions that we'll do from here on will be PYQs, AILET PYQs. Okay, I'll just write it down. Okay, so India should generate solar energy to meet its unmet energy requirements. Assumptions: solar energy is cheaper than other forms of energy. Okay, cheaper or not does not concern that statement, so one is not an assumption. India is capable of generating solar energy. So when the statement says India should do this, the basic assumption is India can do this, is capable of doing this, right? तो आप देखिएगा जब भी बोलेंगे the government should do this, this panel should look into this, the basic assumption that comes with should, the person is assuming that they can or they're capable of doing this, right? So two is an assumption. 3 says India is unable to meet its energy requirements using non-solar sources of energy. Yeah, because it said should do this to meet its unmet energy requirements, right? So 3 also becomes an assumption required for that statement. So option D is correct here, right? So as soon as you are, you become comfortable with that concept of what is required for that statement, you realize solving these questions will become very easy. Okay, let's do the next one. So I'll just clear the screen. Okay, so employers must offer flexible working schedules or risk resignations by talented employees. One says employers should offer flexible working schedules. So, what was given to us was employers must do this, right? Uh, or risk resignations, right? So, this statement is being the way this statement has been written, what it tells us is that it is necessary for them to offer flexible working schedules. Whether the author assumes that they should do this, it's not necessary. So this is like a normative statement, right? Should go, how do we understand that this is a recommendation made by the author? Maybe the author is not of the view that they should offer flexible working schedules, but he's just stating a fact. Fact ye hai, you must do this or you will risk resignations. Now if you ask me whether they should do this, I'll say, yeah, I am neutral there. Whether they should or not, I'm neutral, I don't know. But they must. Required hai, otherwise they will risk resignations. If they are fine by resignations, then yeah, it's okay not to offer flexible working schedules. But should kaisa ho gaya? Offering a view on it. Must is not necessarily a view. Must is like stating a fact that this is necessary. Okay, तो must and should को एक जैसा मत treat करना. तो should वाला part is not getting, is it's not required. Okay. Now, some employees want flexible working schedules. Of course, right? So this is required. If nobody, some को opposite क्या होता है? No. Opposite of some, how do I deny it? No. All का? Not all. Yeah, some not. Okay. So no employee wants flexible working schedules. Then the statement does not make sense, right? So two is an assumption. Some employees value flexible working schedules so much that they would resign if these are not offered. Yes, that is also required, right? So two and three. Option A is correct. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next one. Let's do this one. Okay. COVID-19 is a pandemic issue now. Government should work towards complete eradication of diseases like COVID-19, right? What the government should do or should not do is not required, right? It is a simple statement that COVID-19 is a pandemic issue now. What the government should or should not do, not much is being said. So one is not an assumption. Remember, right? Always remember assumption ke liye we are looking for statements that are required. COVID-19 is not a serious disease and treatment is available, right? So this is also Bekar. So option C is correct here. Turned out to be an easy one, right? Let's do this one. Again, AILET PYQ. We are looking for something that is required. All right. Minute traces of nitrate sometimes present in cattle fodder B. Maybe. Okay, sorry. I think this B has come by mistake. Okay, we'll just let go of B. There's no B here. Okay. In cattle, fodder may be responsible for the poor health of the cattle. Therefore, use fodder G to ensure that your cattle remain healthy. Again, the basic assumption is that G does not contain nitrate, right? So one is an assumption. Nitrate is toxic to all living beings. That is not required, right? So again, an easy one. A is correct here. Let's go on to the next one. Let's do this one. It is again an AILET PYQ. Okay, so be humble even after gaining victory. Many people are humble after gaining victory. Uh, that's not the assumption. So when a statement like this comes, right, it's more of an advice. Be humble even after gaining victory. Uh, so the basic assumption there is potentially a chance that after victory people will not remain humble, right? That's the basic assumption. Nothing much more than that, right? That people will tend to be not humble after gaining victory, something like that, right? But if you look at two here, generally people are not humble. That seems to be a rather vague statement, right? People are not humble. We are talking in the context of after they gain victory, right? So again, generally people are not humble. Let's say generally people are humble, but after gaining victory, they don't tend to remain so, right? So again, two is also not required. So C is correct here. Okay, everyone, let's do this one. AILET PYQ again. Right. The target of a fiscal deficit of 5% of GDP could not be met because of a major shortfall in revenue collections. One says shortfall in revenue collections lead to an increase in fiscal deficit, right? So that looks good, right? That looks good. Once again, one is required. shortfall in revenue collections lead to decrease in fiscal deficit. So देखो, when you are solving for this question, particularly for this question, you know, having some sense of fiscal deficit would be helpful, right? Because people may get confused on increase or decrease, because increase or decrease is not really given. We are just given that target of 5% of GDP could not be met. But yes, when they gave out this question, people got confused. Increase hoga ki decrease hoga. So having some sense of fiscal deficit, which is not really very technical, right, would have helped. So option A is correct here. Okay. All right. Then we move on to another very frequently asked topic, which is strong and weak arguments. Now, with strong and weak arguments, the inherent problem with these questions is they are, they are subjective. So, for example, you are given an issue and you are given two arguments, and you have to judge which argument is strong or which is weak, which is, which is not really, you're not testing these arguments in view of the various evidence. Usually these arguments are just one line, ऐसा कुछ होता है कि there is a yes, and you know this, right? Yes and reason. Okay, so there is a no or yes and a reason statement, just one statement. So you do not have much to figure as to, which one is strong or weak. So it tends to be subjective. But most questions you will still be able to handle them, right? Because these are the points to really consider, right? Generally this template is followed. I'm not saying these are exact rules to be followed. This is not your syllogism or conditional question जहाँ पे वो rules set हैं और black and white है and you just follow the rules. These are subjective. These are not rules. They are, you can treat it as some template which will help you with most strong weak argument questions, if not all, right? So how do we go about them, right? We test these arguments. We sort of ground them, root them in our real world understanding, right? So we are using a lot of real world knowledge and real world reasoning to answer these questions, right? तो ये strengthen और weaken की तरह भी नहीं है. Strengthen और weaken questions में you are looking for a statement that provides the most substantial support in case of strengthen, or you are looking for a statement that absolutely demolishes the argument or weakens it substantially, right? Then we are just checking that option and we are figuring which option does it to the best effect, right? तो यहाँ पे ये भी नहीं है. यहाँ पे जरूरी नहीं है कि if the reason is very strongly worded, right? If the reason looks very sort of substantial, it becomes a strong argument, right? So when you are testing these arguments, you are testing it on two counts, right? तो पहला तो हम ये टेस्ट कर रहे थे कि yes or no makes sense or not. We are testing on this. So for example, issue ऐसा है कि uh, should gender determination test be allowed in India? Gender determination test at, at the time of before childbirth, should those be allowed, right? So we understand that we in India there's no sort of, there is a restriction on it for obvious reasons, female feticide and all those social evils. So if there is an argument which says yes, they should be allowed because people should know, must know, the gender before the child is born. Such an argument will not work in the India context. Just look at how I have placed the first bullet point or the India context as the first bullet point. These arguments are set in India context. So when you're looking at these arguments, your canvas is largely India. How will you perceive that argument in a country like India? तो इंडिया कॉन्टेक्स्ट के साथ वहाँ के जनरल laws of land हैं, right? Commonly understood laws of land. It's not very technical, legal reasoning वाला question नहीं होगा, but the usual law of land जो commonly understood है. Then India is a democratic country, so ऐसा argument ना हो something that goes against those democratic values, right? The argument should not be such that it tends to discriminate between two groups of people, right? It should not seem to favor one group over the other, right? So those balanced arguments that are ethical and moral, right? That are consistent with democratic values, such arguments are strong arguments. और इनके opposite जो consistent with democratic values नहीं हैं, ethical, morally sound नहीं हैं, they become weak arguments, right? So the first test is happening on yes and no itself. या ऐसा दे दिया जाए, should child labor be allowed? And then there is an argument, yes, it will add on to the GDP, right? So whatever the reason, right? However important or strong that reason may look like, yes won't work, right? So you are testing these arguments and yes and no, firstly, and secondly, you're also testing these arguments on the reason provided. तो yes and no पे तो टेस्ट कर रहे हैं और रीजन पे भी टेस्ट कर रहे हैं कि रीजन गुड इनफ है या नहीं, कोई फ्रिवलेस सा रीजन तो नहीं है. The reason has to be good, and yes and no should make moral, ethical, and should align with moral, ethical, and these democratic values, right? So again, strong arguments against social evils, promotes justice, protects vulnerable groups, pro-poor, pro-public welfare, not against general health of the economy. Sometimes we have seen arguments जहाँ पर they talk about freebies, right? That is a very political word right now, but talks about freebies कि ये free and वो free. And then there is an argument that says कि, such freebies should not be promised and delivered because it comes with a heavy burden on the exchequer, general public, tax paying public. So such an argument will start looking like a strong argument, right? That whatever, it could be a pro poor, pro public welfare argument, but we have to make sure it is not against the general health of the economy, right? Then pro peace, regional cooperation, right? That may look so alien words in this day and age, but right, but pro peace and regional cooperation wali arguments generally strong arguments. Again, this is what I talked about कि reasons पे भी test करना है कि reasons are not frivolous reasons, they are relevant to the argument. And then practical wisdom, common sense, reasoning grounded in everyday experience and societal norms in India. Right? I'm not saying all societal norms are good or it will always have to align with societal norms, but usually the ones that are reasonable and driven by rationale. Right? And so, as I said, यहाँ पे थोड़ी subjectivity जरूर होगी. We can follow this template, right? And it will work with most questions. Okay, let's try and solve some today. Okay, all these questions that I've included in the PPT are previous year. Okay, let's start with this one. Okay, is LeBron James the best professional basketball player of all time? Right, one second. Is he the best? Yes, he has had the largest fan base among all professional basketball players in the history of the sport. Does this look like a good reason? Largest fan base? Because best professional player and fan base may not be linked. Somebody having a big fan base, but they're still not the best. That could happen, right? So, argument one is not a strong argument. Uh, Argument two, no, he has changed his team too many times. Okay, so what? Changed his team too many times. Does that have any effect on him being the best player? So that is also out. Yes, no other player has scored more points in their professional career than LeBron James. Yes, that becomes a strong argument, right? So C here is correct, everyone. All right, let's do the next one. Again, AILET PYQ. Now, this is the statement that we are considering, okay? This one is the statement, and then these are the arguments. So there must be mandatory vaccination against communicable diseases, right? That's the statement to consider. One, yes, the collective well being of the population must override individual choice. Now, that reason, so mandatory vaccination, yes to it, is not a problem, right? There was mandatory vaccination during times of COVID, right? So, yes is not morally or let's say ethically wrong, right? So it aligns, it has that moral ethical alignment. And the reason also is a good enough reason, right? So argument one is fine, it's strong. 2 says no individuals must have agency over what they inject into their bodies. What about that? Now, if you look at 1 and 2, they are sort of contradictory to each other. So we are saying argument 1 is strong. Does that make argument 2 weak automatically? Nope. So we can have two strong arguments coming from opposite sides, right? Now, again, when it says no mandatory vaccination, again, it's not in the gray, right? It's not morally, ethically wrong, right? So with no, we don't have a problem, right? People might have that view. What about the reason? Individuals must have agency what they inject into their bodies, and that's also is a pretty good reason, right? So for me, argument one and two, and also as per the answer key, argument one and two are strong, and we don't have a reason to doubt it, right? Argument three says no, this would lead to profiteering by vaccine manufacturers. Now that doesn't seem to be a good enough reason, right? So on one hand, if somebody sort of argues that there must be mandatory vaccination because collective well-being of population must override individual's choice, and on the other hand, somebody sort of turns around and say that vaccine manufacturers will profit out of it. That doesn't seem to be a strong argument to to against mandatory vaccination, right? So argument three uh, is not strong, right? Because of the reason, not because of no or yes. Okay. So we are going with option A here. So I'm solving these PYQs, right? So you have a sense of how AILET has given answers to these questions previously, right? Uh, Yes, as I said earlier, these questions, strong and weak arguments can be subjective, and one can argue from both ends in many cases. But we just need a practical template, which I had shown in the previous slide, to be able to operate through them, work through them quickly and easily, right? So that's how we are doing them. कि थोड़ा practicality angle से we are able to solve them, because otherwise we can look at various arguments and call them strong and weak, and we'll be able to give reasons for both of them, enough reasons for both of them, right? But we are just following that template to make it a sort of a practical, a very practical approach to these questions. Okay, let's do this one again. AILET PYQ. Okay, should there be a limit on the number of times an individual may be elected as a head of state? Right, this looks like a pretty valid question. Argument one says yes, it prevents concentration of power in a single individual for a prolonged time and reduces the possibility of misuse of power. Right. So when we are testing it on yes and no, right? Yes or no, people can say yes and no without being morally or ethically wrong about it, right? So yes, what we understand is कि here we are primarily looking at the reasons given for yes and no, क्योंकि yes or no दोनों ही view हो सकते हैं without, as I said, without being morally ethically wrong about it. Okay. Now, it prevents concentration of power in a single individual for a prolonged time, reduces the possibility of misuse of power. That seems to be a very good reason, right? So, argument one for us is strong. Argument two, no, an incumbent individual will know how to best run the country given their experience. So this reason looks a little frivolous when it says incumbent individual will know how to best run the country, right? We would need more support for this, more evidence for this. Otherwise, it looks like a very opinion-based statement, right? Does not look like a solid reason for saying a no, right? So two is not a strong argument for us. Three says no, the population must be free to give the democratic mandate to the person of their choosing, even if they win multiple times. As I said, we don't have a problem with saying no to this as long as we have a proper reason, and this looks like a good enough reason, right? People Population must be free to give the democratic mandate. It aligns with the democratic values also, right? So argument 3 is also a strong argument, right? So the correct option here is option B. Okay. uh let's do the next one. Again, this is an AILET PYQ. Okay. The rise of OTT platforms is challenging the traditional movie theater business. Argument one, that's the assertion. So, argument one, OTT platforms and traditional movie theater present completely different experience and therefore are unlikely to affect each other. So we understand how this is an argument, right? So instead of saying no completely, it says therefore unlikely, right? So it seems like a good argument, right? Uh, they are completely different experience and therefore are unlikely to affect each other. So we are fine by this, right? Two says OTT platforms ensure instant availability of diverse content, which a traditional movie theater cannot emulate. Right, that also looks like a good argument. Proper reason and for their conclusion, right? So both these arguments are strong. Option C is correct. Okay. Moving on to the next one. Let's do this one. Again, it is an AILET PYQ. Okay, should the government impose restrictions on access to sensitive information to journalists to avoid media hype? Okay. Argument one, the media creates hype and publishes distorted information at times, right? So at times would mean sometimes, right? So that looks like a good reason for for saying that the government should impose restrictions. So we don't have a problem with yes as such, as long as we have a good enough reason, and we have a good enough reason. So one is fine. Two says no, journalists should have access to all the information as media is the best source to expose the malfunctions in the society. Now, this argument also, looks like a good argument because, you would want in a very democratic, free country that there are no restrictions on media. It's like free speech, somebody holding a view of being free speech absolutist, right? So that all information, should be shared with the general public, and they should be allowed to sort of expose any sort of malfunctions or something that needs to be addressed, right? So as I said, in a democratic free speech country, such an argument can work, right? That they should have access to all the information, and they are, because you understand, right? What's the way of course, in today's day and age, we have the internet and we have the social media, but that comes with its own set of problems, right? But to in order for such information to reach to the public, right? Media has to be one big sort of outlet. Okay, so we are fine with this argument, right? I'll just repeat that in a free country, in a free speech country, and in a democratic setup, such arguments can work, and they are likely to work. Three says, yes, at times it leads to harassment of those who are affected and alleged to be involved in the crisis, right? So again, if you just look at the reason, as I said, we don't have a problem in yes or no in this particular for this particular issue, right? Both yes and no can work as long as we have good enough reasons, and we have a good enough reason in three also, right? that it leads to harassment of those who are affected, right? That becomes a good reason to impose some restrictions, right? So, in fact, all three arguments are strong. Option C is correct. All right, let's see if we have more statement argument questions. We have one more, right? So that will become quite a practice for those who are attending this session live or who would watch this session later, right? This will become a good sort of practice material for you guys because all of these questions that we are doing now are AILET PYQs. Okay, should the government introduce a system of obtaining bonds from students for working in India before sanctioning education loans for higher studies? Okay. No, this is not a workable solution and will obstruct the development of young talent in the country. Uh, yeah, right. That looks like a good reason. Restricting student mobility, again, does not seem to be aligning with democratic values, that there is a certain bond that restricts your movement to another country, right? And student mobility is something that is quite encouraged, right? Even in a world which is inward looking, and there's some form of xenophobia going on, and even when borders are being closed down, and such things are happening all over the world. S- and on the student mobility part also, the student visas are being denied by some of the western countries. Even in that scenario, in that environment, right, people will not look at it, especially the intellect, right? They would not look at it in a good way, right? That's not good for the society as a whole, for the humanity as a whole, right? If student mobility is restricted for some reason or the other, right? So to say that introduce a system of obtaining bonds, right, before sanctioning education loan, that will be some restriction. Okay, so one looks like a good sort of no works, and also the reason is a good reason, right? This is not a workable solution and will obstruct the development of young talent in the country. People would be hesitant taking education loans if there is some bond, right? So one is good. Yes, this is the only way to ensure use of talent of a country for the development of the country and not only an individual. So, as we don't have a problem with a yes here, right? There could be some good reason for this, right? But I don't know, right? Finding a good reason would be difficult for a yes, but for sure, this reason does not work. That this is the only way, right? So, had it been a strengthen weaken question, wherein you have to sort of strengthen the argument, the argument ऐसा होता है, the government should introduce a system of obtaining bonds, blah blah blah, and you have to strengthen this. And one of the options says this is the only way to ensure. Then you are taking it to be true. You're taking it to be true, and you are saying yes, this strengthens the argument. But in this case, as I said, we are testing yes and no, and we are also testing the reason. So I'm not taking the reason to be true automatically, right? I'm actually checking it. So to say this is the only way to ensure use of talent, right, for the development of country, I have a problem with that statement. Is this the only way? Right? So the reason is not good enough. So two is not a good argument. Three says, no, this step will be too harsh. Too harsh. As in, again, this is not a proper reason, right? We need a proper reason to be able to say no. Something like what one does. So three is also not a strong argument. The correct option here is A, argument one. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Again, this is AILET PYQ. Okay, should all the school teachers be debarred from giving private tuitions? Argument one says no, the needy students will be deprived of the expertise of these teachers. Does it look like a good enough reason? Again, we do not have a problem with a yes or no here, but it has to be a good reason. The needy students will be deprived of the expertise of these teachers. Needy students, right? Private tuitions in itself implies a fee, right? There's a fee being charged, right? And so we don't really know what needy children would mean here. If are we calling those students needy, those who do not have enough financial resources, or needy in some other way? The moment I use the phrase tuitions, it means, as I said, a fee is involved, right? So the students already are must be going to some schools, right? They may be paying some fee, or they may not be. If they are in a government school, maybe they are not paying any fee, and maybe then they are in that needy wala grouping. But a fee is being charged because it does not say free tuitions; it says private tuitions, right? So that reason, the statement itself is a vague statement. We do not really understand what needy is there, right? So one does not give us a good reason as to why school teachers should not be debarred, because we are looking for something that it's a reason like it would be morally ethically incorrect for a school teacher to give private tuitions, right? Because of the rules being followed in the school. I'm not saying it is always morally ethically incorrect. Maybe some schools allow it, right? But then we need some reason to that effect. And one is therefore not a strong argument for us. Two says this is an injustice to the unemployed, educated people who can earn their living by giving tuitions. How is this injustice? Right? यहाँ पे तो again in a democratic free market economy, right? Everyone is entitled, have the right to do what they, use their skill set in the best way possible to earn themselves, livelihoods, right? So to say that some people should not do this because other people will not be able to do this, it will keep other people unemployed. It's not a good reason, right? So two is out. Yes, only then the quality of teaching in schools will improve. How? Bad reason, right? So three is out. Yes, now salary of these teachers is reasonable. Okay, so now salaries are reasonable. Again, that cannot be the reason for allowing or disallowing these teachers, debarring these teachers from giving private tuitions. As I said, We wanted some reason that is grounded in, that is rooted in, in some school policy. Or if they are school teachers in a government system, then there is a government policy, right? We needed such reasons for yes and no, right? So for also the reason is frivolous. So the correct option is D, Delhi, none of the above. Okay, so we move on to the next set of questions. Now, these questions again, whatever questions we'll do, I think three or four of them uh, will be mostly taken from AILET 2020 and after. Okay, so we are doing these questions because AILET tends to come up with some of the reasoning questions that do not fall neatly into the established categories of assumption, strengthen, weaken, statement assumption, strong, weak argument, right? But yes, they are a method of reasoning and two speaker arguments. This is also a method of reasoning question in a way. They are method of reasoning questions, and we have done method of reasoning in the classes, right? They are not very frequently asked, but yes, you may find a question here and there. The idea is we have to be, very well prepared for the reasoning section, because last year, you understand, the scores, right? The the cutoffs, they just skyrocketed, right? The cutoffs were anything above 120 last year in AILET, right? So we just have to make sure that we are covering enough ground. Okay, but yes, they are relevant. They also become important because they have been asked previously. So this is an AILET PYQ. I don't exactly remember the year, but as I said, it is after AILET 2020. I think 2022 or 2023 or 2021, one of these years. But certainly AILET PYQ. Let's try to solve this one. Okay, let's do it together. A wildfire has broken out in a large national park, spreading quickly due to dry conditions and strong winds. The forest officers only have a limited amount of firefighting resources, including helicopters and water trucks and personnel. They must decide where to allocate these resources to save as much of the park as possible. To maximize their efforts, they prioritize the areas of the park that are home to endangered species and ecosystems. So this seems to be an important point here. It says to maximize their efforts, they prioritize the areas of the park uh, that are home to endangered species and ecosystems. So, what's the principle here, right? So the principle here is that in the time of crisis, right, in the time of crisis, you are maximizing your efforts by catering to, by prioritizing those who need the maximum attention at that moment in time. So, for example, in this park, uh, they prioritize efforts towards endangered species and ecosystems, right? Now, which of the following most mirrors the principle in the passage above? One, a university offers a limited number of scholarships each year. To ensure the best use of its funds, it prioritizes applicants from underprivileged backgrounds and those with academic potential, believing this will give the most significant long term impact on the community, right? So, when they are offering scholarships, they are prioritizing underprivileged applicants from underprivileged backgrounds. This is like they are again prioritizing those who need who would need these scholarships the most, right? This is much like I'm catering to endangered species and I'm prioritizing endangered species and ecosystems, right? They would be the ones that would need the most attention at that moment in time. So one is aligning with that principle. So one is fine. Two says a charitable foundation receives an influx of donations for disaster relief. In distributing the funds, it focuses on the hardest hit communities where homes were completely destroyed, providing them with emergency emergency shelter and rebuilding service before addressing other needs. Right. So again, they're prioritizing the ones who need it the most, the hardest hit communities. So two also sort of aligns with that principle. Three says a large grocery store faces a major food supply shortage due to transportation issues. To minimize the impact on consumers, the store decides to limit the sale of high demand items like milk, bread, and meat, allowing each shopper to purchase only a small amount to ensure everyone can get basic supplies. So now it is more of a rationing move wherein you are doing it with sort of equality, right? So there is a sense of equality. And in the previous two examples and in the principle, right, in that example in the original passage, right, the principle is of prioritizing those who need that help the most. तो उन दोनों cases में you were prioritizing people, right? It was more of an equity thing, right? I'm not saying 100% equity, but yes, it's more of an equity thing. And three is more of an equality thing, right? So there's a difference. So three does not align. So the correct option here is B. Okay. Let's do another one. Let's do this one. Let's do this one. As of April 2022, a few cases of COVID XZ variant, that's the issue, have been found in India, which may be more transmissible than previous variants. The government should institute a national lockdown. So, this is the issue, and this is person one's take on it, that they should institute a national lockdown preemptively to prevent the potential wave of COVID XZ. Although lockdowns cause great difficulty, there is no other way to prevent a potential new wave. Now, person two clearly disagrees. How we are doing these questions is, I've told you this in the classes also, but when there are two speaker arguments, let's say there's a person one and then there is a person two, right? Saying something, arguing for something, and person two something else. So, what we need to decide is there a point of agreement between the two, right? So, if there is one, try to determine that. And then if there is a point of disagreement, it could be the case there's only point of agreement. It could be the case that there's only point of disagreement. It could be the case that they agree on some part and they disagree on some other. So just try to fix that before answering these questions, right? So, person's two argument is a national lockdown is a drastic measure that severely harms businesses and people. The risk posed by the new COVID XE variant does not justify a national. So they clearly are arguing sort of, one is arguing in favor of a lockdown and the other one is arguing against the lockdown. So lockdown hona chahiye ya nahi chahiye, they disagree there, right? Let's look at the options. Person one and person two agree that the lockdown will definitely be needed in future. Person two has not said some anything to that effect. Person one is saying that lockdown must happen right now, right? So in the future के लिए person two ने कुछ नहीं बोला है, so we don't know if they agree on this or not. Person two thinks that a national lockdown is never justified. Again, all person two is saying is COVID for this variant it is not justified. Is never justified is wrong. Person one and two agree that a lockdown has negative consequences. And this is the part they agree on, by the way. Person one also admitted that it causes great difficulty for people, right? So if you have to sort of, decide, determine what is the point of agreement, the point of agreement is that they both sort of agree that lockdowns cause difficulty for people. They agree there. Although they disagree on whether this lockdown for COVID XZ is justified or not, right? So option C is correct here, and C is correct. Okay. Let's do one more. I think there's one more on this. This one is an easy one. So yeah, so this one is easy. As I said, you should have gotten to the correct answer. It says children should not read novels, person one, that contain instances of racism. Person two says they can use such novels to educate children against racism. Now, clearly they disagree on whether children should read such novels that contain instances of racism or not. They disagree there, right? Let's look at option A. Person one and person two agree that some novels contain instances of racism. Yes, this is where they'll agree, right? They disagree whether to read it, whether children should read them or not, but they clearly agree that there will be some novels that contain instances of racism, right? So A looks like a good option, right? Person two supports racism. No, he just supports reading of these novels to be able to learn from them, right? Or for them to sort of, for parents and teachers to educate children about against racism, right? So this is out. Option A is correct. Okay, now lastly, what we'll do is we'll take up this particular passage. This was in AILET 2021, I think, uh, or 22. So on this passage, we had some questions. This had come in the reasoning section, okay? Uh, so much of the questions that followed, actually, many people, when they were solving this passage, when they were solving this passage in the exam setting while they were taking AILET, many of them didn't attempt this, right? And many of them had gotten some questions incorrect. But let's do it together today, and you will realize that the passage may have been a little different, right? The questions may have been phrased a little differently, but the questions themselves were not that difficult to sort of decode. They were essentially inference questions, right? And we will solve them as we would solve inference questions. But yeah, let's you go through the passage first, and then we'll move on to the questions. Okay, so very quickly, let's go through the passage once together, right? And then we'll move on to the questions. So it says, imagine that society can be divided into X's and Y. X and Y refer to people with different physical characteristics or other characteristics that can easily be observed or discovered, such as race, ethnicity, immigrant status, or religious practices. Okay, so these are two different groupings of people, right? And you can discern between the two groupings easily. Within each group, there are good and bad types. Okay, there are good and bad types. Assume that X's are wealthier and more politically powerful. Why is perhaps because they are more numerous or because they are descended from a politically powerful group. So either they are large in number, X's, or they are descended from politically powerful group. So either it's the case that there is, it's an instance of majoritarianism. They are large in number, right? Their grouping is bigger, and therefore they wield more political power. Or it could be the case that they are politically powerful generally, right? So maybe aristocracy or something is in effect. So either majoritarianism or aristocracy. We don't know what it is exactly, but one of the two. Under each conditions, it is possible that members of X will signal their cooperative propensity by discriminating against the Ys. Okay. Discrimination functions as a signal because it is costly. So discrimination is a signal and not really, let's say, openly adopted. It is just a signal, right? Signal to do what, right? Signal to show probably loyalty towards the group members, right? So it is costly. Why is it costly? One gives up the opportunity to do business or socialize with Ys who are good types. So once you hint at that, I am sort of, I am favoring one grouping over the other, or I'm discriminating against Ys to show loyalty towards your own group members. What you are risking is you will not be able to do much business with Ys, or you won't be able to socialize with Ys, especially those who are good types. And because conspiracy theories based on traditional fears of people with physical or cultural differences, or people who are recent arrivals, provide a focal point. Given these beliefs, those who discriminate against outsiders will appear to be loyal to the insiders. And it's a general sort of societal tendency, right? It's not something which is very alien, we know. And it's playing out more and more in today's world, right? That you discriminating against outsiders will be a signal that we are loyal to the insiders, to our own group. In equilibrium, all or most excess will avoid Ys, and those who do not will be ostracized by the excess and may seek refuge with the Ys. So it not only that you will be sort of left out of the group. You will be isolated, and then you will have to be with Ys. And almost all Ys will avoid the X's, falling back on each other when it is desirable to enter cooperative ventures, right? Finally, we assume that because of the political and economic dominance, members of X control the government, including the criminal justice system. So either because they are in majority, or because it may be an aristocratic setup where few wield the power, right? Okay. Now, which of the following observations is incorrect? So this also was sort of the way the questions have been framed. All these questions in this passage, they're they're asking is us as to what is incorrect. So many people misread that and marked what is correct. Okay. Anyway, let's do this question. A says if X is a numerically large group, Y comprises of small ethnic groups. Okay, so this is not incorrect per se, right? It could be the case that X is a large group and Y is a small ethnic group. And because of the numbers, they wield much political power or greater political power, right? So, as I said, it's not really incorrect, right? The chances, there is a possibility that this is, let's look at other options. If X is a tiny minority of people with aristocratic lineage, Y consists of the masses. Yes, so they said in the passage, right? Either the case is that they are wielding greater political power because of the numbers, or because they are small group who wield political power, right? So if this is a big number, this is a small number. If they are aristocratic lineage, then these are the masses, right? So again, A and B both align with what is given to us. C says numerical strength of X is always higher than that of Y. And that is incorrect, because we are given either this is the case or this is the case, right? So in the latter case, where there are these people are with aristocratic lineage, they need not be big in numbers, right? So always वाला इसको गलत कर देता है. So C is correct here. Let's look at D. X may or may not be a numerically larger group. Yes, that is correct, not incorrect. So this is also out. We're looking for something that is incorrect. Option C is correct. C is the correct option for being incorrect. Okay. All right. We are getting some answers in the chat box. I wasn't really paying attention earlier. It's okay, but yes, somebody said C, I think. Right. What about the next one? Solve the next one, and I'll give you some time. Which of the following observation is incorrect? If the X's operate the criminal justice system to the disadvantage of Y's. Again, incorrect. Okay. Let's do this. So A says Y's must rely heavily on each other for protection against criminals. That's okay, because they are operating the criminal justice system. They must rely heavily on each other, right? So they are being discriminated against. So yes, this looks fine, not incorrect. Ys may form a solitary group and signal their loyalty to the group. Yes, of course, this also aligns with the passage. Ys may express loyalty to Ys by engaging in activities that X's disapprove of and even punish. Right? C is also okay, right? It said that they may do things that may not be, right, just to sort of express their loyalty to the insiders. Okay. D says Y, who engages in activities disapproved by X's, can never be trusted in comparison with other Ys. In fact, the opposite is true. If they do some activity disapproved by X, they'll become more loyal, or they'll be seen as more loyal, right? So never be trusted is incorrect, right? So it becomes the correct option. So if you do something that is not approved by X's, you will look, right. You seem to be very loyal to the group, right? So D, Delhi is correct. So both, some, the two people who answered in the live chat are both right. Okay, let's do the third question here. Okay, and you do realize that they are not difficult as such. They are inference questions in a way. So there are two more, third and fourth. Okay, assume that criminal punishments will have different effects on X's and Y's. Which of the following is incorrect again? Whys obtain more respect from other whys when they become subject to criminal punishments. Okay, so that aligns. A criminal punishment will deter a Y less than it will deter a similarly situated X who obtains no enhanced respect. Yes, that also aligns. That aligns with what is given to us in the passage. Criminal punishments impacting X's and Y's in the same manner so long as the nature of the punishment is the same. No, they will not impact X's and Y's in the same manner. Y's, when they do something criminally, or they are sort of criminally convicted, right? They will have respect from their group, but not X's, because X's control the criminal justice system. So C is incorrect here. A Y who has a criminal record will not be trusted by X's. Right. Will not be trusted by X's. That also aligns. Right. So what is incorrect is C. Okay. We had different options here, but do you get why it is C here? Okay. Any doubt? Ask me. Then assume that semi-voluntary punishment is a reliable signal of a Y's loyalty to the other Y's. Which of the following is an incorrect observation? Semi voluntary हो गया कि they are volunteering, they are semi, in a semi way they are doing those crimes on purpose. So it is a reliable signal of a wise loyalty to other wise. Okay, so we will go back to the previous question in the third one, but let's do this one first. Which of the following is an incorrect observation in the fourth one? Okay, why has an incentive to get himself punished by the excess? Yes, there is an incentive, right? He will appear more loyal to the group. So it is consistent, right? It is not incorrect. B, Y may commit a crime even if Y does not have a particular desire to commit a crime. Yes. And why? Because it sends out a signal of Y's loyalty to the other Y's. And just look at this semi-voluntary punishment. Semi-voluntary, they committed that crime voluntarily to signal that we are very loyal, right? Semi-voluntary शायद इसलिए बोला होगा कि punishment, they may not desire the punishment, but yeah, they committed the crime, and yeah, just to send out a signal that they are very loyal. So B is also consistent. C, Y will commit a crime only if X provokes Y to commit a crime. And this is wrong, right? Is this the only reason why Y will commit a crime? No, the other reason is this, to send out a signal. Not only if X provokes Y, they'll just do it, right? To signal loyalty. So C is the correct option because it is an incorrect observation. D, a criminal punishment that was hidden from the public would deter a wife from crime more effectively than a criminal punishment that broadcasts his offense. Yes, this will be more effective. Why? Because this criminal punishment will broadcast his offense, and this will make him look loyal, right? This will make him look loyal to the group. So something that is broadcasted, I will be seen as a hero in the group, right? So I'll do it. right? If, for example, stealing from excess makes me a hero, right, and that is broadcasted, I'll tend to do it more. And compared to some other criminal punishment, which is not in the public eye, which is hidden from public, that I'll not do because I have no motivation, much motivation to do it. So D is also aligns with the passage. C is correct here. Okay. And in the previous one, look at C in the third one. It says criminal punishments impact X's and Y's in the same manner. Do they? No. Criminal punishment for Y's is a signal that he's loyal to the group, right? It makes him sort of in public eye, in amongst the members of the group, he may be seen as a hero. But criminal punishment for X's who control the criminal justice system, for them it is a crime. Nobody in that grouping of X will like the X who has committed a crime because it is against them, right? For Y's, it is a moment of glory, moment of respect. So they are not, the impact is not the same for these groups. So incorrect ढूंढना था, therefore C is correct in the third one. Okay. So this was an interesting passage, an interesting set of questions. Okay, so expect such questions in the reasoning section because they have been doing so late, right? Some questions are thoda sa hatke. Essentially, they are testing you on the same concept. For example, this is just inference. But yes, the way the question is presented is sort of is new. Okay, so I think we are mostly done here, but for 1 second, just give me a moment. I'm just trying to do one last question before we sort of wrap this. Just give me a second. Yeah, this one. This is a AILET 2022 question. Okay. Uh, it is a method of reasoning question, and it's a tricky one also. So this will be the last question for us, last question of the day for us. So I'll give you some time to solve it, and then we'll discuss it. Oh, I'm sorry, I think I was muted. Okay, so we're doing this together now. We recently evaluated the impact that an amendment to a particular national legislation would have on the population by taking a survey in the most populous state of the country as well as a nationwide survey. So there were two surveys, right? One was the nationwide one. The other one was a survey in the most populous state of the country. So this was one and two. We were unable to get any information from the national survey results. However, we found that the response, so this is also important, we were unable to get any information from the national survey results. However, we found that the response to the amendment was highly promising in the statewide survey. We concluded that national population's response would be promising as well. So from the national survey, they couldn't get any meaningful sort of insight. From the state survey, they got some. From that state survey, they overgeneralized and said nationwide response will be promising. So if you look at this conclusion, right, the last line, the conclusion on the national population is not supported by good evidence. They're just overgeneralizing, right? Whatever evidence they had, that survey, it did not provide any sort of meaningful information, right? So now what is happening in the argument? So method of reasoning questions is like an inference question, right? You have to figure what is actually happening in the argument. A says infers a statistical generalization by deploying statistical tools to different data sets. Many people mark this as the option. If you look at it, he does not deploy any statistical tool because that survey did not provide any information. He did not get any information from nationwide survey. He just overgeneralized it from the state wala survey, right? So he's not deploying any statistical tool. He's just overgeneralizing, right? So A is out. B says bases the prediction about the impact of a phenomenon on the impact of the phenomenon's cause. This is complicated, but it does not capture what is happening in the passage. Let's try to break this down. Bases the prediction about the impact of the phenomenon on the impact of the phenomenon's cause. Is this what is happening? No. ऐसा नहीं है कि एक किसी फिनोमिनन का इम्पैक्ट वो बेस कर रहा है उसके कॉज पर. ऐसा कुछ हो ही नहीं रहा है. द ओनली थिंग दैट इज हैपनिंग इज कि नेशन वाइड सर्वे डिड नॉट गिव एनीथिंग. स्टेट वाइड सर्वे में एक स्टेट ने बोला पीपल आर हैप्पी और प्रॉमिसिंग और हाईली प्रॉमिसिंग, तो उसने बोला पूरी कंट्री में लोग पीपल विल सी इट एज हाईली प्रॉमिसिंग. ओनली दैट मच इज हैपनिंग. This is not what is happening in the argument. C. Makes a prediction about future events on facts from multiple recent comparable events. No, he's not doing this. Is he doing this on facts from multiple recent comparable events? C is out. D. Uses evidence from a case where direct evidence is available. Yes, the state wala. To make a conclusion about a dissimilar case. It is a dissimilar case because this is a nationwide, right? From the state, you can't derive a conclusion, infer anything about the whole nation as a whole. Where direct evidence is not available. Yes, direct evidence is not available. That survey did not yield any information, right? So D, Delhi is correct here. Okay, this was a good question in AILET 2022. Yep, D is correct, Shivi. Okay, so we'll wrap this here. Okay, assumptions, strong weak arguments, inference coming in various forms and shapes. Then in the previous session we had done syllogism and conditional, right? All this combined, I think we have covered enough ground. Some of the other question types we didn't really discuss was statement, conclusion, and inference questions. The usual inference questions we have covered extensively while we were also preparing for Clat, right? So yeah, I just thought that some of these questions we should discuss right before the exam once again. So yep. Thank you for to those people who are doing this live, and I hope this had added some value, right? And I'll use this opportunity to wish you all the best for the AILET, and keep your calm. It's very important for the AILET that you sort of don't panic or don't get anxious, because AILET tends to throw in surprises. Not that Clat doesn't do it, but yes, especially after the recent Clat, I'm sure you understand the value of being calm on that day, so that you are able to navigate through any of those surprises thrown at you. And you just have to understand that the questions may come in various forms and shapes, right? जैसे अभी हमने थोड़ी देर पहले वो passage वाला किया था, right before this, right? So they may come in various forms and shapes, but essentially they are testing you on the basics of critical reasoning, inference, assumption. Just stick to the basics. Don't get perturbed by how the question has, is presented, right? तो बस ये देख लेना कि essentially question पूछ क्या रहा है. And also in the logical reasoning, what you can do is you can solve those questions initially where you think you'll be doing well, right? तो जैसे मैंने इंग्लिश कर लिया, जीके कर लिया, logical reasoning में, I'm not doing it in a linear sequential way. I'm picking those questions जहाँ पे I'm very comfortable, right? क्योंकि मेरे को एक जनरल सेंस मिल जाएगा कि we have some AR questions here, some legal questions here, some statement assumption questions here, right? So I will have a sense कि कहाँ पर कौन कौन से questions हैं, and then I am sort of, doing them, based on the topics that I'm very comfortable in, right? So yeah, so all the best once again, and we will connect with you once the exam is over. We will analyze the paper. Okay, take care. Bye bye.